A 7-year-old girl stood in the snow, rusty knife trembling in her hands, protecting 5 starving children and her dying mother. "Stay back," she warned the stranger. "That's what the last man said, right before he killed my mama." Behind her a woman lay bleeding in the snow, a bullet wound to the shoulder, lips turning blue from the cold. The man knelt slowly, unbuttoning his coat. "Your choice right now," he said quietly, "is trust me or freeze to death." 3 days earlier, Ethan Walker woke to another morning he didn't want to face. The ranch house stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, cold seeping through the walls despite the banked fire in the hearth. Ethan lay in bed for a moment, staring at the rough-hewn beams overhead, counting his breaths. 1, 2, 3. 4 years since he'd buried them. 4 years since fever had taken Sarah, Benjamin, and Charlotte in the span of 3 terrible days. 4 years of waking up alone in a house that had once been full of laughter and life. He pushed himself upright, feet hitting the icy floorboards. The shock of cold was good. It reminded him he was still alive, even if he didn't particularly want to be. The kitchen was exactly as he'd left it the night before. Clean, empty, too quiet. He moved through the morning routine with mechanical precision. Coffee first, black strong enough to strip paint. Then out to the barn to tend the horses, feed the chickens, check the cattle in the near pasture. Work was the only thing that kept the memories at bay. Work and the blessed exhaustion that followed. But this morning, as he stood at the kitchen window sipping his coffee, his eyes found the photograph on the mantel. Sarah on their wedding day, young and radiant, her hand tucked into his arm like she'd found her safe harbor. He'd been 24 then, fresh back from the war, thinking the worst was behind him. How wrong he'd been. He turned away from the photograph before the ache in his chest could spread, before he could start down that familiar path of what-ifs and if-onlys. There was fencing to check on the North Ridge. That would eat up most of the day. Good. The more exhausted he was at night, the less time he had to think before sleep claimed him. By noon, the temperature had dropped to 15 below zero. Ethan rode the fence line on Bess, his 15-year-old mare, the only living thing on the ranch that seemed to understand his silence. She was steady, reliable, content to plod through the deep snow without complaint. The kind of companion a broken man needed. The sky hung low and gray, pregnant with the promise of more snow. Ethan checked each post, tested each wire, made notes in his worn leather journal of repairs needed come spring. If he made it to spring, if he didn't finally find the courage to do what he'd been contemplating for 4 long years. That's when Bess stopped. Her ears pinned back against her skull, her nostrils flared, breath steaming in the frigid air. Ethan sat up straighter in the saddle, suddenly alert. In all their years together, Bess had never spooked without reason. Then he heard it. A scream. High-pitched, desperate, unmistakably human. Unmistakably a child. For a moment, Ethan sat frozen, the sound cutting through 4 years of numbness like a hot knife. He hadn't heard a child's voice up close since Charlotte's last whispered words. "Papa, I'm cold." The memory threatened to drag him under, but then the scream came again, weaker this time, and his body moved before his mind could catch up. His spurs hit Bess's flanks. The old mare lunged forward, snow flying from her hooves as they thundered toward the abandoned garret barn on the eastern ridge. The structure loomed ahead, 3 walls standing, the 4th collapsed under the weight of last week's blizzard. No smoke rose from within. No sign of fire. No sign of life. Just that terrible fading scream. Ethan threw himself from the saddle before Bess had fully stopped. His rifle was in his hands without conscious thought, trained reflexes from the war taking over. He approached the gap in the collapsed wall, carefully weapon raised, prepared for trouble. What he found stopped him cold. 6 children huddled in the far corner of the barn, pressed together like a litter of abandoned puppies. They were wrapped in rags and scraps of cloth that couldn't possibly be keeping them warm. Their lips were blue. Their small bodies trembled violently. And in front of them, a woman lay in a spreading pool of blood. She was young, maybe 28, with dark hair plastered to her skull, with a mixture of snow sweat and blood. Her left shoulder was a mess of torn fabric and crimson, a bullet wound still seeping. Her face was pale as death lips tinged with purple, but her eyes were open, alert, fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. But it was the child standing in front of the woman, the one holding a rusted kitchen knife in both trembling hands, who truly captured his attention. A girl, 7, maybe 8 years old, dark hair falling across her forehead, brown eyes flecked with gold, a pointed chin, the determined set of her jaw. Charlotte's face staring back at him from a stranger's body. Ethan's rifle lowered, an inch shock rippling through him. For one impossible moment he thought he'd finally lost his mind. That grief had finally broken him completely. "Stay back." The girl's voice cracked, but the knife stayed pointed at his chest. "I'll cut you. I swear I will." Behind her, 5 more pairs of eyes watched him from the shadows. A tall, thin boy of 9 or so, one arm wrapped protectively around a smaller child. 2 little girls clinging to each other, one blonde one with dark curly hair. Another boy, maybe 6, coughing so hard his whole body convulsed. And the smallest, barely more than a toddler, silent and still, with enormous brown eyes. The woman on the ground tried to speak, but only a wet rattling sound emerged. The girl's eyes flickered to her for a fraction of a second before snapping back to Ethan. "That's what the last man said," the girl continued, thrusting the knife forward. "Right before he killed my mama." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He forced himself to focus, to push past the shock of that familiar face. These were real children in real danger. Whatever tricks his grief-addled mind wanted to play these 6 souls needed help right now. "I'm not that man," Ethan said, keeping his voice low and steady. He carefully, slowly lowered his rifle to the ground. "My name is Ethan Walker. I have a ranch 2 hours south of here. I can help you." "Prove it," the girl demanded. "How did you prove something like that? How did you show a child who'd seen the worst of humanity that decent people still existed?" Ethan did the only thing he could think of. He knelt in the snow, feeling the cold seep through his pants, and began unbuttoning his heavy sheepskin coat. "What are you doing?" The girl's eyes widened. "You're freezing, all of you." He shrugged off the coat, held it out toward her. "Take it." She didn't move. The knife trembled in her grip. "Your lips are blue, girl. Your mama is hurt bad. You need help, and I'm offering it. You can take it or not, but I'm not leaving until you do." "Ruby," the tall boy spoke up from behind her. "Maybe we should." "Shut up, Sam." She didn't look away from Ethan. "How do we know this isn't a trick?" she asked. "You don't," Ethan said simply. "But your choice right now is trust me or freeze to death. There's nobody else coming up this mountain. Storm's getting worse. Another hour or 2, and you won't be able to feel your hands and feet. Hour after that, you won't feel anything at all." The smallest child in the back, the toddler, started to cry. Not loud, not the healthy wail of a normal child. A thin, reedy sound, like a wounded animal trying not to attract predators. Something in the girl's face cracked. She turned slightly, just enough to look at the crying child. "Jesse, hush now," she whispered, and in that moment Ethan saw the weight she was carrying. This wasn't just a scared little girl. This was a child who'd been forced to become a mother, a protector, a leader, when she should have been playing with dolls and picking wildflowers. "Let me help," Ethan said quietly. "Please." The woman on the ground made another sound, weaker this time. The girl looked down at her, and Ethan saw naked fear cross her young face. "Mama," she whispered. The woman's eyes were starting to flutter, losing too much blood. Even from where he knelt, Ethan could see she was fading fast. "Your mama needs help right now," Ethan said, keeping his voice gentle but urgent. "I know field medicine from the war. I can slow the bleeding, but we need to get her somewhere warm, somewhere safe. My ranch has a fire, food, blankets, everything you need. He owns us." The blonde girl spoke up, her voice small but clear. "Mr. Blackwood, got papers and everything." Ethan's blood went cold. "Nobody owns children. Tell that to the judge who signed the contracts." The tall boy, Sam, stepped forward, putting himself between the girl with the knife and the others. His voice carried a bitterness far too heavy for a 9-year-old. "Tell that to the sheriff who looks the other way." "Where are you running from?" Ethan asked. "The girl with the knife." Ruby finally lowered the blade just an inch. "Blackwoods mining camp. 3 days north in the mountains." "You walked 3 days in this weather in those clothes." "We didn't have much choice." She lifted her chin, that familiar defiant gesture that twisted something in Ethan's chest. "It was run or—" She glanced at the smaller children behind her. "Or worse." Ethan didn't need her to finish that sentence. He'd heard whispers over the years, the kind of stories men shared in low voices in the saloon about operations in the mountains that trafficked more than gold. He'd told himself they were exaggerations, the kind of ugliness that happened somewhere else to someone else's children. Looking at these 6 faces, at the woman bleeding out in the snow, he knew better now. "My ranch is 2 hours south," he said. "I've got food fire medicine for that cough." He looked at the boy, hacking into his sleeve. "You let me take you there, I promise you'll be safe." "You promise?" Ruby said the word like it meant nothing, like she'd heard it before from other mouths and learned exactly what promises were worth. "I do," Ethan said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "And if we say no, then I'll leave my coat ride back to town and send someone else up here to help. But by the time they get here in this storm—" He didn't finish, didn't need to. The children looked at each other. Something passed between them, a silent conversation born of shared trauma and desperate necessity. Finally, the tall boy Sam stepped forward. "If you're lying to us," the boy said, his voice shaking but his eyes steady, "you should know I killed a man once, one of Blackwood's men, when he tried to—" He paused, glancing at the blonde girl. "When he came for Hannah. I hit him with a rock. He went down, didn't get back up. So I know what it's like to kill someone, and I'll do it again if I have to." Ethan met the boy's eyes and saw the truth there, saw the horror of it. 9 years old and already carrying that weight. "I believe you," Ethan said quietly, "and I hope you never have to do it again." He turned his attention to the woman on the ground. She was barely conscious now, her breathing shallow and irregular. If he didn't act fast, these children were going to watch their mother die right in front of them. "Ruby," he said, "I need you to trust me for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. Let me look at your mama's wound. I promise I won't hurt her." The girl hesitated, then slowly nodded. She lowered the knife completely and stepped aside. Ethan moved quickly to the woman's side. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 28 at most. Her face, beneath the blood and grime, held a quiet dignity, even in extremis. No tears streaked her cheeks, no signs of hysterics or begging. Just a fierce, determined will to survive. He gently pulled aside the torn fabric of her coat and shirt. The wound was bad. A through and through, by the looks of it, the bullet having entered her left shoulder and exited near her collarbone. Messy, but potentially survivable if he could stop the bleeding and get her warm. "What's her name?" Ethan asked as he worked tearing strips from his own shirt to use as bandages. "Margaret," Ruby said quietly. "Margaret Bennett. Everyone calls her Maggie." "Well, Maggie Bennett," Ethan said, pressing the makeshift bandages against the wound. "You've got a hell of a brave daughter. You should be proud." Maggie's eyes flickered open, focusing on him with effort. Her lips moved, forming words he had to lean close to hear. "Don't trust him, Ruby." Her voice was barely a whisper. "That's what the last man said." Ruby. So that was the girl's real name. Must be a nickname. "I'm not the last man," Ethan said firmly, binding the wound as tightly as he dared. "And I'm going to get you out of here. All of you." Maggie's hand suddenly shot up, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Her dark eyes bored into his. "If you hurt them," she managed each word clearly, costing her, "I'll haunt you from hell." Despite everything, Ethan felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "I believe you would." He finished the bandaging, knowing it was temporary at best. She needed proper care, a real doctor, warmth, and medicine. But this would have to do until they reached the ranch. "Can you ride?" he asked her. She tried to nod, but the movement made her gasp in pain. "I'll take that as a maybe," Ethan said. He turned to the children. "Listen up. We need to move fast, and we need to move together. It's going to be cold, and it's going to be hard, but we can make it. Understand?" 6 pairs of eyes watched him with a mixture of hope and fear. "Sam, is it?" Ethan looked at the tall boy. "I'm going to need your help. You seem like the kind of boy who knows how to work." Sam straightened slightly, and Ethan saw a flicker of pride break through the fear. "Yes, sir." "Good man. We're going to get everyone on horses. The little ones will ride together on Bess. You and—" He looked at the blonde girl. "Hannah," Sam supplied. "Her name's Hannah. You and Hannah will walk with me. We'll take turns carrying the smallest one." "Jesse," Ruby said. "His name is Jesse. He's 3. Ethan nodded. "And this young man—" He gestured to the boy who was still coughing. "Toby," the boy managed between hacks. "I'm 6. "All right, Toby. You'll ride with the little ones. We'll keep you warm." "What about Grace?" Ruby pointed to the other small girl, the one with dark curls who'd been silent until now. "I'm 5, Grace announced, and despite everything she managed a small smile. "And I'm not afraid." "Good for you, Grace," Ethan said. "You're going to ride with Toby and Jesse." It took nearly an hour to get everyone organized. Ethan fashioned a makeshift sling to support Maggie on Bess, with Jesse, Grace, and Toby arranged around her. Ruby insisted on riding behind her mother, arms wrapped around her waist to keep her from falling. Sam and Hannah walked alongside, taking turns carrying supplies. The journey back to the ranch was the longest 2 hours of Ethan's life. The temperature continued to drop, the wind picking up until it drove snow sideways across the valley. He led Bess by the reins, one eye always on Maggie's pale face, watching for signs she was slipping away. Behind him he could hear Ruby talking softly to her mother, a steady stream of encouragement. "Stay with me, Mama. We're going somewhere warm, somewhere safe. You promised you'd keep fighting. You promised." The words twisted something in Ethan's chest. How many times had he whispered similar things to Sarah, to Benjamin, to Charlotte? How many promises had died with them? "Mr. Walker." Sam's voice broke through his thoughts. "Ethan," he corrected. "Just Ethan." "Ethan, then. Why are you helping us?" It was a fair question. Ethan thought about it for a moment, listening to the crunch of snow under their feet, the labored breathing of the children, the wheeze of Toby's cough. "Because leaving you there to die isn't something I could live with," he said finally. "Most people could," Sam said quietly. "Most people do." "Then most people are cowards." They walked in silence for a while longer. Then Sam spoke again, his voice even smaller than before. "My mama sold me. To pay debts. That's how I ended up at Blackwood's camp." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. That wasn't right. "Legal, though. Man had papers and everything." "Sometimes the law is wrong." Sam looked up at him with those 2 old eyes. "You really believe that?" "I do." "Then you're either the bravest man I ever met, or the stupidest." Despite everything, Ethan found himself almost smiling. Probably both. As they crested the final ridge, the ranch came into view below. Smoke rose from the chimney, a beacon of warmth in the gathering darkness. Grace, who'd been silent for most of the journey, suddenly gasped. "Is that a real house?" "It is," Ethan said, "with a real fire and real food." "Food." Toby's voice was barely a whisper between coughs. "You said there'd be food." "All you can eat, son. All you can eat." They reached the ranch just as the last light faded from the sky. Ethan dismounted first, then carefully lifted the children down one by one. Grace was light as a feather, but managed to smile. Toby burned with fever, his small body limp. Jesse clutched his ragged blanket and looked at Ethan with those enormous, haunted eyes. Ruby came last, reluctant to leave her mother's side even for a moment. When her feet hit the ground, she winced, and Ethan saw fresh blood seeping through the rags wrapped around her feet. "Inside," he said. "Now, all of you." He lifted Maggie down as gently as he could. She was barely conscious, her head lolling against his shoulder. Up close, even in the dim light, he could see the strength in her face, the determined set of her jaw, the proud angle of her cheekbones. This was a woman who'd fought for her life and her daughter's life with everything she had. The house hit them like a wave. Warm air from the banked fire rushed out to meet them. The simple presence of walls and a roof and safety. Grace started crying immediately, great gulping sobs of relief. Toby collapsed onto the nearest chair, still coughing. Hannah stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, though she made no sound. Sam kept himself together by sheer force of will. Ethan could see it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched so tight it had to hurt. Ruby walked through the room, slowly touching things. The table, the stove, the curtains at the window, like she was making sure they were real. "Whose house is this?" she asked. "Mine." "You live here alone?" "I do now." She looked at the closed door that led to the back rooms. "What's in there?" Ethan hesitated. He hadn't opened those doors in 3 years, hadn't been able to face what was behind them. "Bedrooms," he said finally. 3 of them. They'll need airing out, but they're dry and they have beds." Ruby turned to look at him, this fierce little girl with his daughter's face and a survivor's eyes. "We can stay here. Really?" Something shifted in Ethan's chest. Something that had been locked up tight for 4 years started to come loose. "Long as you need," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. He laid Maggie on the kitchen table, the best light source in the house. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse weak and thready. The bandages he'd applied were soaked through with blood. "Ruby," he said, "does your mama know anything about healing?" Ruby nodded, tears starting to spill down her cheeks. "She learned from her grandmother, Lakota medicine, but she can't help herself when she's unconscious." Ethan looked at the wound at the woman who was fading before his eyes and made a decision. "Then you're going to have to help me save her." Ruby's eyes went wide. "Me? You've watched her work. You know what she does. I know field medicine from the war. Between us, we might have a chance." For a moment, Ruby just stared at him. Then she straightened her spine, wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and nodded. "All right. Tell me what you need." "Boiling water, clean cloths, and anything your mama would use for a wound like this." Ruby turned to Sam. "Start a fire. Big one. We need water boiling fast." To Hannah, "Find clean fabric. Anything will do. Tear it into strips." The children sprang into action with practiced efficiency. This wasn't the first crisis they'd faced together. While they worked, Ethan examined the wound more closely. The bleeding had slowed but hadn't stopped. If the bullet had nicked an artery, Maggie would have been dead already. That was the good news. The bad news was that she'd lost so much blood and there was a high risk of infection. "Ruby," he said, "what would your mama use?" The girl closed her eyes, clearly trying to remember. "Yarrow to stop bleeding, sage to prevent infection, pine resin to seal the wound. Do I have any of that?" "I don't know. Do you have a medicine chest?" Ethan shook his head. "I have whiskey. That's about it." Ruby bit her lip, thinking. "Then we improvise. The whiskey will work for cleaning. For the rest—" She looked around the kitchen, then suddenly moved to the window where dried herbs hung from the rafters. "These. Mama always said prairie plants have medicine too, if you know how to use them." She selected several bundles, brought them to the table. "This one, I think it's yarrow, and this might be sage. I'm not sure about all of them, but Mama said in an emergency use what you have." While the water boiled, Ethan heated his knife in the fire. He'd done this before during the war. Extracted bullets from screaming men while artillery fire thundered overhead. But this was different. This was a woman who'd fought to save her child, a mother who reminded him painfully of Sarah. "Ruby," he said gently, "this is going to be hard to watch. Do you want Sam to help instead?" She shook her head fiercely. "I'm her daughter. I'm staying." "Then hold her down. This is going to hurt." Ruby positioned herself at her mother's head, small hands pressing down on Maggie's shoulders. Sam stood ready with more bandages. Hannah held Jessie and Grace back, keeping them from seeing too much. Ethan poured whiskey over the knife over his hands over the wound. Maggie's eyes flickered open, and she gasped in pain. Then he went to work. The bullet had passed clean through, which was a mercy. But it had torn tissue on its way out, leaving a ragged exit wound that wouldn't close on its own. He had to clean it, pack it with the herbs Ruby had selected, and stitch it closed with thread, sterilized in boiling water. Maggie thrashed twice, then her eyes locked onto Ethan's. In them he saw pain, yes, but also something else. Determination. A refusal to give in. She bit down on the leather belt he'd given her and endured the rest in silence. Ruby talked to her mother throughout a steady stream of words. "You're doing so good, Mama. Almost done. Just a little more. You're the bravest person I know. You're going to be okay. You promised you'd fight. You promised." When it was finally over, Ethan bound the wound with clean bandages tight enough to prevent bleeding, but not so tight as to cut off circulation. Maggie had passed out again, but her color was marginally better. Her breathing, while still shallow, had steadied. "Will she live?" Ruby whispered. Ethan looked at this 7-year-old girl who'd just helped perform emergency surgery on her own mother. "If will and courage count for anything, then yes. She'll live." Ruby sagged with relief, and before Ethan could react, she'd thrown her arms around his neck and was sobbing into his shoulder. Great heaving sobs that seemed to come from the very bottom of her soul. He stood there awkwardly at first, unsure what to do. He hadn't held a child in 4 years, hadn't felt that particular weight of small arms trusting him to keep them safe. Then slowly, carefully, he brought his hands up and held her while she cried. "You did good," he said quietly. "You saved your mama's life." "I was so scared," Ruby sobbed. "I thought she was going to die. I thought we were all going to die." "I know, but you didn't. You survived, all of you." She pulled back, eventually wiping her eyes with the heels of her hands. "I'm sorry. I got your shirt all wet." "Don't apologize for being human," Ethan said. While Maggie slept, Ethan turned his attention to the other children. He heated soup thick with vegetables and chunks of beef from the steer he'd slaughtered in the fall. He sliced bread, spread it with butter and honey. He poured milk for the little ones and hot tea for Sam and Ruby. They ate like they'd forgotten how. Grace put away more food than seemed possible for someone her size. Sam tried to pace himself, but kept reaching for more. Hannah ate silently, methodically, like she was storing fuel for a journey. Toby picked at his plate between coughs, but Ethan noticed he finished everything. Only Ruby held back. "Aren't you hungry?" Ethan asked. She shrugged. "Making sure there's enough for the little ones first." His heart clenched. 7 years old, and already she'd learned to put herself last. "There's plenty," he said firmly. "Eat." After dinner, he tended to their feet. One by one, he unwrapped the bloody rags, cleaned the wounds, picked out stones and splinters, bandaged them properly. Ruby watched every move he made, cataloging it, learning like she expected to have to do this herself someday. Toby was the worst. The boy's cough had a rattle to it that Ethan didn't like. His forehead was hot enough to fry an egg. He needed a doctor. Real medicine. Things Ethan didn't have at the ranch. "How long has he been sick?" Ethan asked Sam. "Started in the mines, dust got in his lungs, been coughing ever since." "How long were you down there?" Sam's jaw tightened. "Toby was underground 12 hours a day, sometimes more. Blackwood said kids work better in the small tunnels. Less pay, less food, less trouble." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, fighting down the rage that threatened to consume him. When he opened them again, Sam was watching him with a strange expression. "You're angry," the boy said. "Damn right I'm angry, but not at you. At the men who did this, at a world that lets it happen." Something in Sam's rigid posture softened just a fraction. "Most folks don't care what happens to kids like us." "I care," Ethan said quietly, "and I'm going to make sure nothing like that ever happens to you again." It was a promise, the first real promise Ethan had made in 4 years. And as he looked at these 6 children, at Maggie lying pale and still on his kitchen table, he felt something he hadn't felt since Sarah died. Purpose. He put them to bed in shifts 2 to a room. Grace and Hannah took the room that had been Charlotte's, curling up together on the small bed like puppies in a pile. Toby and Jessie got Benjamin's old room. Toby propped up on pillows to help him breathe, Jessie clutching his ragged blanket and staring at the ceiling. Sam insisted on sleeping in the main room near the door. "In case anyone comes," he said. Ethan didn't argue. The boy needed to feel useful, needed to believe he was protecting the others. That was his way of coping. Which left Ruby. She stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, the room Ethan hadn't entered since Sarah died, and stared at the dusty quilt, the empty fireplace, the photograph on the bedside table. "Is that her?" she asked. "Your wife?" Ethan stepped up behind her, looked at the faded image of Sarah on their wedding day. Young, beautiful, alive in a way that made his chest ache. "That's her." "She's pretty." Ruby's voice was small. "What happened to her?" "Fever. Same one that took our children." "How many?" "2. Benjamin was 5. Charlotte was 3. Ruby was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I look like her, don't I?" "Your daughter." Ethan's throat closed up. "Yeah, you do." "Is that why you helped us? Because I look like her?" It was the kind of question only a child could ask, cutting straight to the heart of things without any adult pretense. "It's why I stopped," Ethan admitted. "But it's not why I brought you here. I brought you here because what's happening to you is wrong. And I couldn't just ride past wrong and pretend I didn't see it." Ruby turned to look at him. Really look. And for the first time some of the wariness in her eyes eased. "Mama used to say most folks are good if you give them half a chance." "Smart woman, your mama," Ethan's voice caught. For a moment, looking at Ruby's face in the firelight, he saw Charlotte so vividly it hurt. The same stubborn chin, the same fierce eyes. But this wasn't Charlotte. This was Ruby, her own person, her own story. "She was the bravest person I ever knew," Ruby continued, and the spell broke. Ruby's voice wavered just for a second. "Mr. Blackwood wanted to buy me. Said I'd bring a good price because—" She stopped, jaw-clenching. "Because what?" "Because I'm pretty. That's what he said. Pretty girls are worth more." Rage, white-hot and murderous, flooded Ethan's veins. He forced himself to keep breathing, to keep his face calm for the child's sake. "Your mama said no," he said. "She said she'd die first." Ruby's composure cracked. "So he beat her, made me watch, said it was a lesson about what happens when people say no to him, and when she grabbed a knife tried to fight back." The tears came now streaming down her dirty face. "He shot her, right there in front of everyone, and then he told his men to come get me." "But you ran." "Mama told me to. Last thing she ever said. Run and don't look back. So I did. Found the others along the way. Kids who'd escaped or been left behind or were just trying to survive. We stuck together, watched out for each other. That's the only way any of us made it this far." Ethan knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. "Ruby, listen to me. What happened to your mama wasn't your fault. And what that man wanted to do, none of that was your fault either. You understand?" She shook her head. "If I wasn't pretty, if I was ugly or plain, Mama might still be alive." "No." His voice was firm. "Your mama died because a bad man made a bad choice. That's on him. Not on you. Not ever on you." For a long moment she just looked at him. Then slowly, hesitantly, she stepped forward and wrapped her thin arms around his neck. Ethan froze. He hadn't been hugged in 4 years. Hadn't held a child since Charlotte. Hadn't felt that particular weight of small arms trusting him to keep them safe. Then he hugged her back, gently, carefully, like she might break. "You're safe now," he whispered into her hair. "I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep. This one I can." She pulled back, looked at him with those 2 old eyes. "He'll come for us. You know that. Mr. Blackwood, he doesn't let anyone go. Let him come. You don't understand. He has men, lots of them. Guns, money, the law on his side." "I survived a war," Ethan said quietly. "Buried my whole family. Spent 4 years wanting to die and not having the courage to do it. He touched her cheek, brushed away a tear. I'm not afraid of some mine owner with delusions of godhood, and I sure as hell won't let him take you or any of those other children. That's a promise, too. Ruby stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once like she was accepting a contract. Okay, I'll trust you, for now. She turned toward the bed, then looked back. But I'm sleeping with the knife. Despite everything, Ethan felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Fair enough. He gave her the master bedroom, found extra blankets, lit a small fire in the hearth. Then he went back to the main room where Sam was sitting with his back to the wall, eyes fixed on the door. You should sleep, Ethan said. Can't. Why not? Every time I close my eyes, I see it. Sam's voice was barely a whisper. The man I killed, his face when he went down, the sound his head made when it hit the rock. Ethan sat down beside him, keeping a respectful distance. How old are you, son? 9. That's too young to be carrying what you're carrying. Sam's laugh was bitter. Didn't have much choice. No, I suppose you didn't. Ethan was quiet for a moment. What happened? The boy was silent for a long time. Then, his name was Burke, one of Blackwood's men. He used to watch Hannah the way a wolf watches a lamb, made comments, touched her hair when he walked by. She was scared all the time, jumping at shadows, barely eating. Sam's hands clenched into fists. One night I heard her scream, ran to find him dragging her toward the back buildings, where they keep the... He couldn't finish. I understand. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a rock big as my fist, hit him once, twice, kept hitting him until he stopped moving. Sam's voice went flat empty. Then I grabbed Hannah and we ran, found Ruby and the others, and we just kept running. Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he said, You saved her life. I took a life. Sometimes that's the same thing. Sam looked at him, really looked, and Ethan saw the boy underneath the survivor, scared, broken, desperate for someone to tell him he wasn't a monster. What you did wasn't murder, Ethan said firmly. What you did was protection. There's a difference. A man comes for a child with evil intent, and you stop him. That's not a sin. That's justice. Doesn't feel like justice. No, Ethan agreed. It never does. He leaned back against the wall. I killed men in the war, lots of them. Some were shooting at me, some were just in the way, and every one of them had a mother, a father, maybe a wife, maybe children. Every one of them was someone's son. How do you live with it? Some days I don't, Ethan said honestly. Some days the weight of it feels like it's going to crush me. But then I remember why I did it, to protect the men beside me, to end a war that was tearing the country apart, to come home to my family. His voice caught. And even though my family's gone now, the reasons were still good. The cause was still just, same as yours. Sam was quiet for a long time. Then, I've never told anyone the whole story before. What Burke was going to do to Hannah. What I did to stop him. You told me. Yeah. Sam looked at him, something shifting in his eyes. I guess I did. Get some sleep, son. I'll keep watch. But I said I'd keep watch. You've been protecting these kids for how long? 2 weeks, since we left the camp. 2 weeks. You're 9 years old and you've been the man of this group for 2 weeks. That's enough. Tonight you're just a boy. You're safe and you can rest. The tears came then, silent and sudden. Sam wiped them away fast, ashamed, but Ethan pretended not to notice. Okay, Sam whispered. Okay. He lay down where he was on the floor near the door and was asleep within minutes. The kind of exhausted, dreamless sleep that comes from finally feeling safe enough to let go. Ethan sat in the dark rifle across his knees, watching the fire burn down to embers. 6 children. 6 stories of horror and survival. 6 lives that had somehow found their way to his door. And 1 woman fighting for her life on his kitchen table. He thought about Sarah, about what she would say if she could see him now. She'd always wanted more children, had talked about filling the house with little ones, giving Benjamin and Charlotte a whole pack of siblings to run wild with. Life had had other plans, or maybe this was the plan all along. Maybe everything had been leading him to this exact moment. The war, the ranch, the fever, the 4 years of grief. All of it preparing him for the day he'd hear a scream in the snow and find 6 souls who needed saving as much as he needed to save them. Or maybe that was just the kind of nonsense a man told himself at midnight when he was trying to make sense of a senseless world. Either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was that these children were here now, in his house, under his protection. And come hell or high water, he was going to keep them safe. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, the wind howled against the windows like something trying to get in. And Ethan Walker, who'd spent 4 years wishing he was dead, finally remembered what it felt like to have something worth living for. He didn't know yet that Silas Blackwood was already on their trail. Didn't know that the man had sent riders out the same day the children escaped, tracking them through the snow with dogs and guns and the kind of cold determination that made ordinary evil look tame. Didn't know that in 3 days those riders would reach his gate. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty, a truth that burned in his chest like an ember that refused to die. He'd kill every last one of them before he let them take these children. Every last one. The first light of dawn came gray and cold through the frost-covered windows. Ethan hadn't slept, hadn't even tried. He'd spent the night watching, listening, waiting for trouble that hadn't come yet, but surely would. His body ached from sitting upright in the chair rifle across his lap, but his mind felt sharper than it had in years. Sam was still asleep on the floor, curled up like a dog guarding the door. In sleep, his face looked younger, softer, more like the child he should have been instead of the soldier he'd been forced to become. The other children remained quiet in their rooms. Even Toby's coughing had subsided for now, but it was Maggie who commanded most of Ethan's attention. She lay on the kitchen table where he'd left her, chest rising and falling in shallow but steady breaths. Her color had improved marginally through the night. The bleeding had stopped completely. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. As the light strengthened, Ethan stood and stretched his joints, popping in protest. He needed to start breakfast. These children would wake hungry, and he had 6 mouths to feed now. 7 once. Maggie was well enough to eat. He moved quietly through the kitchen building, up the fire, setting coffee to boil. He pulled out eggs from the cold cellar, bacon from the smokehouse, flour for biscuits. His hands moved through familiar motions, but his mind was elsewhere, already planning. They'd need more supplies. He'd need to ride into Buffalo Springs, talk to Marshal Sterling, figure out what legal protections these children might have. But first he needed to keep them alive and warm. The smell of cooking bacon brought them out one by one. Grace first patting on her bandaged feet, dark curls wild from sleep. She stopped in the doorway, eyes huge, taking in the scene. The warm kitchen, the food sizzling on the stove, Ethan standing there with a spatula, very much real and not a dream. "It wasn't a dream," she whispered. "No, sweetheart, it wasn't. We're really here, in a real house, with real food. Real as it gets." She burst into tears. Not sad tears, Ethan realized, but the overwhelming kind that came when something too good to believe turned out to be true. He knelt down and she ran into his arms, sobbing against his shoulder. "It's okay," he said, patting her back awkwardly. He'd forgotten how to comfort a crying child. "You're safe now." "Mama said I'd find somewhere safe," Grace managed between sobs. "Before she went to sleep and didn't wake up. She said I'd find someone good." Ethan's throat closed. "Your mama was right." Hannah appeared next, silent as always, watching from the shadows, until Grace pulled away and reached for her. The 2 girls held hands, and Hannah's eyes met Ethan's for just a moment. She didn't speak, but something in her expression had shifted. Not quite trust yet, but the beginning of it. Then Toby, still coughing, but walking on his own feet. The boy looked at the food on the stove, and his eyes filled with wonder. "Is that bacon?" "It is." "I ain't had bacon since—" He trailed off, trying to remember. "I don't know. Since when?" "Then you're overdue. Sit down." Ruby came last, carrying Jessie on her hip. The toddler's face was buried against her neck, his small fist clutching that ragged blanket like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. She looked at Ethan, at the food, at the other children already settling around the table. "You cook?" she asked. "Had to learn after my wife passed. Wasn't going to starve." Most men would have just gone to the saloon. Most men didn't have a ranch to run. He gestured to an empty chair. "Sit, eat." She almost smiled. Almost. Then she sat down with Jessie in her lap and reached for a biscuit. They ate in silence at first, the kind of desperate eating that came from not knowing when the next meal would arrive. Ethan had to remind them twice to slow down, that there was plenty, that nobody was going to take it away. It was Sam who finally spoke. The boy had woken quietly and joined them at the table, watching Ethan with those calculating eyes. "What happens now?" Sam asked. Ethan sat down his coffee cup. "What do you mean?" "I mean we can't stay here forever. Blackwood's men will come looking. They always do." "Let them come." "You keep saying that." Sam's voice was tight. "But you don't know him. You don't know what he's capable of." "Then tell me." The children exchanged looks. That silent communication again, the kind that came from shared trauma and desperate necessity. Ruby spoke first, setting down her fork. "Silas Blackwood runs the biggest gold operation in the Northern Territory," she said. "Legal on the surface, got papers for everything, licenses, contracts, partnerships with important men in Denver and Cheyenne." "But underneath," Ethan prompted, "underneath he runs children." Sam's jaw clenched. "Buys them, steals them, takes them from mothers who can't pay their debts, puts them to work in the mines because we're small enough to fit in the tunnels where grown men can't go. And when we can't work anymore," Toby's voice was barely a whisper between coughs, "when we get sick or hurt or too big for the tunnels." He stopped, unable to finish. Nobody else finished the sentence either. Nobody had to. Ethan's hands gripped the edge of the table so hard the wood creaked. "How many children are still up there?" 20, maybe more," Ruby said. "Ruby." She shifted Jessie to her other hip. "New ones coming in all the time. Old ones." She stopped. "Disappearing," Sam finished quietly. "That's what they called it. When a kid got sick or tried to run or just stopped being useful, they'd disappear. And nobody does anything. Blackwood owns the law up there. The sheriff's on his payroll." Hannah's voice startled them all. She spoke so rarely that when she did it carried weight. "The judge, too. And the territorial marshal owes him money. I listened when they thought I was too scared or too stupid to understand, but I understood everything." Ethan looked at her with new respect. "What else did you hear?" "That Blackwood has connections all the way to Washington. Politicians who look the other way because the gold keeps flowing and the money keeps coming. That he's untouchable because he knows things about important men, things that would ruin them if they came out." "Nobody's untouchable," Ethan said quietly. "That's what my mama said." Ruby's voice was hollow. "Right before he shot her." The silence that followed was heavy with grief and rage. Ethan stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the snow-covered valley. His land, the place he'd built with his own hands, where he'd buried his family, where he'd spent 4 years trying to die without having the courage to actually do it. "There's a town called Buffalo Springs about 30 miles south," he said. "Got a real marshal there, man named Owen Sterling. I served with his brother in the war." "You think he'll help?" Sam asked. "I think he'll listen, and sometimes listening is the first step." "What if it's not enough?" Ethan turned back to face them. 6 children, 6 pairs of eyes, all watching him with a mixture of hope and fear that was almost painful to witness. "Then we'll find another way. But I'm not sending you back to that monster. Not today. Not ever. You understand me?" Ruby held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay. We'll trust you. We'll try your way first." It wasn't much, but it was something. A crack in the wall she'd built around herself, a window through which light might eventually shine. A sound from the kitchen table made them all turn. Maggie was stirring, a soft moan escaping her lips. Ruby was on her feet instantly. Jessie thrust into Grace's arms as she rushed to her mother's side. "Mama! Mama, can you hear me?" Maggie's eyes fluttered open. They were unfocused at first, wandering, then they found Ruby's face and sharpened. "Ruby!" Her voice was a dry rasp. "Baby, where are we?" "We're safe, Mama. We're at Mr. Walker's ranch. He saved us. He saved you." Maggie's eyes moved past Ruby to find Ethan standing by the window. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze taking in his face, his stance reading him the way only someone who'd survived by reading people could. "You," she said. "You're the man from the barn." "Yes, ma'am." "I told Ruby not to trust you." "You did." "Was I wrong?" Ethan met her gaze steadily. "I hope so." Something flickered across Maggie's face. Not quite a smile, but close. "Thank you," she said simply. "For my daughter. For all of them. You did most of the work. Ruby helped me patch you up. She knew what to do." Maggie's hand found Ruby's, squeezed weakly. "That's my girl. Always so brave. You need to rest, Mama. You lost a lot of blood. I need water, and I need to see that you're all really safe." Ethan brought water, helped prop her up enough to drink without choking. Maggie's eyes never left the children gathered around the table. She counted them silently, her lips moving. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all present, all alive. "Where's Blackwood?" she asked, and there was steel in her voice despite her weakness. "Don't know," Ethan said. "But I'd bet money he's looking for you. He'll come here, when he finds out where we are." "I know. You should send us away, before he does. We've already brought you enough trouble." "Ma'am, with all due respect, I didn't ask your opinion on that. You're staying until you're well, all of you. That's final." Maggie studied him for another long moment. Then incredibly she did smile. Just a little, but it was there. "You're a stubborn man, Mr. Walker." "Ethan? And yes, I am." "Well, Ethan, I suppose if we're going to impose on your hospitality, you should know my full name, Margaret Ann Bennett. Everyone calls me Maggie." "Pleasure to meet you properly, Maggie, even under the circumstances." "The circumstances could be worse. We could all be dead in that barn." "That's one way to look at it." Their eyes met again, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Two people who'd both lost everything and somehow found themselves here in this moment trying to keep 6 children alive. The moment was broken by a knock at the door. Every child in the room went rigid. Sam was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between the door and the younger children. Ruby's hand found that rusted kitchen knife she'd kept close. Even Hannah silent. Hannah moved to put herself in front of Grace. Ethan held up a hand. "Easy. Could be anyone." But his own hand moved to the rifle leaning against the wall as he approached the door. "Who's there?" "Dr. Nathan Hayes." "Ethan, it's me. Open up." Ethan relaxed marginally but didn't lower the rifle until he'd opened the door and confirmed the identity of his visitor. Dr. Hayes stood on the porch, black medical bag in hand, his breath steaming in the cold morning air. "Nathan, what brings you out here?" "Saw you ride through town like the devil was chasing you yesterday. Figured something was wrong." The doctor's eyes moved past Ethan to take in the scene inside. The children. The woman on the table. He didn't even blink. "May I come in?" Ethan stepped aside. Dr. Hayes entered, stamping snow from his boots, and moved directly to Maggie. He set down his bag and began examining her with practiced efficiency. "Bullet wound," he observed. "Through and through. Recently treated. Who did the field work?" "I did," Ethan said, "with help from her daughter." Dr. Hayes glanced at Ruby with raised eyebrows. "Did she now?" "Well, young lady, you did an excellent job. Wound is clean, bandaged properly. She should heal fine if infection doesn't set in." He pulled medicines from his bag. Carbolic acid for cleaning, laudanum for pain, a packet of powder Ethan didn't recognize. "This is willow bark and poplar," the doctor explained, "for fever and inflammation. Easier on the stomach than laudanum, but just as effective." He looked at Maggie. "You're lucky to be alive, Mrs. Bennett." "It's Miss," Maggie corrected quietly. "Widow. My apologies. Well, Miss Bennett, you need rest, fluids, and time. That shoulder will take weeks to fully heal. You're not to lift anything heavier than a teacup for at least a month. I have 6 children to care for. Then they'll have to care for themselves for a bit. Or, Dr. Hayes looked at Ethan. I suspect Mr. Walker here might lend a hand. I will, Ethan said simply. After Dr. Hayes had finished with Maggie, he examined each of the children in turn. Ruby's feet, Sam's head wound, Hannah's old scars, Toby's lungs, Grace's hands, Jessie's malnourishment. He worked quietly, efficiently, making notes in a small journal. When he was done, he pulled Ethan aside. That boy Toby, his lungs are bad, very bad. Coal dust, I'd guess. That's what Sam said. He worked underground at a mining camp. Dr. Hayes' jaw tightened. How long? 6 months at least. At 6 years old. It wasn't a question. The doctor was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with his professional composure. He needs rest, clean air, and frequent steam treatments. I'll leave you some herbs. Boil them and have him breathe the vapor 3 times a day. Will he recover? Maybe. Maybe not. The damage is already done, but children are resilient. With proper care. He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished because they both knew there were no guarantees. As Dr. Hayes packed up his bag, he spoke quietly so only Ethan could hear. People in town are talking. A single man with a single woman and 6 children under his roof. Ethan's voice went cold. Let them talk. I'm on your side, Ethan. Always have been. But Mrs. Victoria Ashford has already started stirring up the Ladies' Aid Society. You know how she gets. I don't care what Victoria Ashford thinks. Maybe you should. She's got the ear of half the town, and her husband is the land commissioner. If she decides to make trouble for you, then she can try. These children need help. That's all that matters. Dr. Hayes smiled faintly. You sound like Sarah. She never cared much for public opinion either. The mention of his wife sent a pang through Ethan's chest, but he didn't let it show. Sarah would have done the same thing I'm doing. Probably would have done it better. She'd be proud of you. Dr. Hayes clapped him on the shoulder. I'll be back in 3 days to check on Miss Bennett and the boy. In the meantime, if anything changes, send word immediately. After the doctor left, Ethan turned his attention to the practical matters of housing 6 children and a wounded woman. The house needed airing out, beds needed fresh linens, wood needed chopping for the extra fires they'd need to keep everyone warm. Sam proved invaluable. The boy seemed to have an instinct for what needed doing and did it without being asked. He helped Ethan split wood, haul water, organize supplies. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that forms between men who understand each other without needing words. It was late afternoon when the first real test came. Ethan was in the barn tending to Bess when he heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. He grabbed his rifle and stepped outside to find 4 riders cresting the ridge. They wore badges, deputies from Buffalo Springs. Sam appeared at his elbow, breathing hard from running. Are they here for us? Don't know yet. Stay close, but let me do the talking. The lead rider was a man Ethan didn't recognize. Young, maybe 26 or so, with an honest face and careful eyes. He raised one hand in greeting as they approached. Mr. Walker, I'm Deputy Marcus Webb. Marshal Sterling sent us to check on you. Ethan didn't lower the rifle. That's so. Why would Sterling be worried about me? Riders came through town yesterday, mean-looking bunch, asking questions about runaway laborers from a mining operation up north. Said these laborers were children. And what did the marshal say to that? Said there's no such thing as a runaway child, just children running from something bad. Webb's eyes moved past Ethan to the house where Ruby stood on the porch, knife in hand. Marshal figured you might have trouble coming your way, sent us to help if needed. Ethan studied the deputy for a long moment. The man's hands were visible, empty of weapons. His 3 companions sat easy in their saddles, not in fighting stances. Either they were genuinely here to help, or they were very good liars. How many children? Webb asked quietly. 6. Something shifted in the deputy's expression. Anger carefully controlled. Blackwood's operation. That's what they tell me. Son of a... Webb turned and spat in the snow. We've heard rumors about that camp for years, never could prove anything, never could get close enough. They say he's got the law in his pocket up there. Maybe up there, not in Buffalo Springs, not with Marshal Sterling. Webb met Ethan's eyes. Sir, if you've got 6 children who can testify about what's happening in those mines, that's evidence, real evidence, the kind that can bring a man down no matter how many politicians he owns. These children have been through hell. I'm not putting them through more trauma just to satisfy the law. I understand that. But if Blackwood gets them back... Webb didn't finish. Didn't need to. Ethan was quiet for a moment, weighing options. Then he said, "You'd better come inside." He introduced the deputies to the children one at a time, letting each child decide how much distance they wanted to keep. Sam stayed close to Hannah, his protective instincts on full alert. Ruby kept Jessie in her arms, watching the newcomers with wary eyes. But it was Grace who surprised them all. She walked right up to Deputy Webb and looked at his badge. "Is that real?" "It is." "Does it mean you help people?" "It means I try to." "Good." She nodded firmly. "Because we need a lot of help." Webb crouched down to her level. "What's your name?" "Grace. Grace Holloway. My mama is in heaven now, but before she went she said angels would look out for me." She studied his face. "Are you an angel?" Something softened in the deputy's expression. "No, sweetheart, just a man trying to do what's right." "That's what Mr. Ethan said, too." Grace turned to look at Ethan and she smiled. Really smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from any of them. Maybe that's what angels look like when they're pretending to be people. The next few hours were spent in careful planning. Deputy Webb explained that Marshal Sterling had already sent word to the territorial governor alerting him to the situation. If Blackwood tried to claim legal ownership of the children, he'd have to do it through proper channels, which meant time, which meant opportunity. "But that only works if we can keep the children safe until the legal process plays out," Webb said. "Blackwood won't wait for courts. He'll come himself or send enough men to take what he wants." "How many men does he have?" "Last count maybe 20 regular employees plus however many guns he can hire when he needs them." Ethan did the math in his head. 4 deputies himself against 20 or more armed men. Not good odds. "We need more people," he said. "Working on it." Webb rubbed his jaw. "Marshall's putting together a posse, but it takes time. Folks are scared of Blackwood. His reach is long and his memory longer." "What about the Army?" "There's a fort 2 days east." "Already sent a rider. But the Army moves slow, and they don't like getting involved in civilian matters unless there's proof of serious crimes. Children being enslaved isn't serious enough. It is to us. It is to any decent person. But to some colonel sitting behind a desk, it's a local matter until someone proves otherwise." Ethan wanted to hit something, wanted to ride up to that camp himself and burn it to the ground. But that wouldn't help the 6 children depending on him. That would just get him killed and leave them alone again. "So we wait," he said. "We wait, we prepare, and we pray. Blackwood gives us enough time." He didn't. On the 3rd day, just as dusk was settling over the valley, Sam came running from the barn. "Riders!" the boy gasped. "Coming up the valley, lots of them." Ethan didn't ask questions. He grabbed his rifle and ran to the porch. From there he could see them clearly. 10 riders spreading out across the valley floor like a net closing around prey. At their head a man in a black coat on a black horse sitting ramrod straight like a general surveying a battlefield. Silas Blackwood. Deputy Webb was already there, his men taking positions behind the water trough, the woodpile, the corner of the barn. Not great cover, but better than nothing. "That's him?" Ethan asked. "That's him. Doesn't look like much, does he?" "Neither does a rattlesnake until it bites you." Ethan turned to find Maggie standing in the doorway. She was pale, one arm in a sling, but upright and steady. "You should be in bed," he said. "I should be dead. Being upright is an improvement." her eyes fixed on Blackwood with an intensity that could have melted steel. "That's the man who shot me." "I know, and you're not going to give him another chance. Get back inside with the children." "No." "Maggie, he shot me once and I survived. I'm not hiding from him now. Those children need to see that I'm not afraid anymore." She paused. "And I'm not." There wasn't time to argue. The riders had stopped about 50 yards out, close enough to talk, but far enough to have running room if things went sideways. Blackwood sat motionless for a long moment, studying the ranch, the men, the defensive positions. Then he smiled. "Mr. Walker," his voice carried across the cold air, smooth and pleasant as poisoned honey, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "I don't believe I do." 6 children, runaway laborers from my mining operation, contracted legally and properly through their surviving parents or guardians. Blackwood pulled a stack of papers from his coat, held them up. "I have documentation, signed, witnessed, filed with the territorial office. I don't care if you have a letter from the president himself. Those children aren't going anywhere. I'm afraid that's not your decision to make. The law is quite clear on matters of contract labor." Deputy Webb stepped forward. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm Deputy Marcus Webb from Buffalo Springs. I'm going to have to ask you to take this matter up with the courts." Blackwood turned his attention to the deputy, and something changed in his expression. A flicker of recognition quickly masked. "Deputy Webb, Marcus." Blackwood's smile widened. "I didn't expect to see you here. Does your mother know you're working against family?" The words hit like a thunderclap. Ethan's head snapped toward Webb, and he saw the truth written on the young man's face. Shock, shame, confirmation. "You're his nephew," Ethan said flatly. Webb's jaw tightened. "Was. Not anymore." From inside the house came a child's voice, Sam, urgent and afraid. "He's one of them. The deputy is one of them." Ruby's voice followed sharp with betrayal. "We're trapped." Blackwood heard it too. His smile grew colder. "Yes, Marcus here is my sister's boy. Good lad. Worked for me for 3 years before he got foolish ideas about justice and righteousness." He looked at his nephew with something like pity. "You always were soft, Marcus. Your mother spoiled you." "My mother died ashamed of what you are," Webb said quietly. "She died in comfort in a house I bought her. Don't forget that." "I forget nothing." Webb's hand moved to his gun, but he didn't draw. Not yet. Blackwood looked around at the defensive positions, at the deputies at the ranch. He seemed almost amused. "You've made quite the alliance, Mr. Walker. Even Mrs. Victoria Ashford's crusade against you seems to have lost steam, though I suppose that's to be expected." His smile widened. "After all, she knows what happens to people who don't pay their debts. Her husband, the land commissioner, owes me quite a substantial sum. I thought having her discredit Miss Bennett publicly might offset some of that debt." Ethan's blood went cold. So that was it. Mrs. Ashford's hatred wasn't personal. It was coerced. "You son of a—" Deputy Webb started forward. Blackwood raised a hand. Now, let's keep this civil." Blackwood's attention returned to Ethan. "Mr. Walker, I'm told you're a reasonable man, a veteran who served his country, a rancher who minds his own business, so I'm going to give you one chance to be reasonable." "I'm listening." "Give me the children, all 6. In return, I'll pay you $500 for your trouble, and we'll forget this ever happened. You can go back to your cattle and your silence and your grief. Nobody else needs to get hurt." $500. More money than Ethan had seen in years. Enough to pay off debts, buy new stock, rebuild the ranch into something thriving. Blood money. Every cent of it soaked in the suffering of children. "Go to hell," Ethan said. Blackwood's smile flickered. "I was hoping you'd say that. It makes what comes next so much simpler." He raised one hand. "Everyone down," Ethan shouted. The first shot came from Blackwood's side, wild and high, splintering the porch rail. Ethan returned fire, saw one rider jerk and fall. The deputies opened up from their positions, and suddenly the valley was full of noise and smoke and chaos. Ethan moved without thinking, old instincts from the war taking over. Fire chamber fire. Find cover. Keep moving. Don't let them pin you down. A bullet whined past his ear. Another punched through the barn door behind him. He dropped 2 more men, saw Webb take down a third. But there were too many. They were being overrun. Then, from inside the house, a sound that turned Ethan's blood to ice. A child screaming. He sprinted for the door, burst through, and found chaos. One of Blackwood's men had come in through the back window. He had Grace by the arm, was dragging her toward the broken glass while she kicked and clawed and screamed. Sam was on the floor, blood streaming from a cut on his head. Ruby stood in front of the other children with her rusty knife, but she was trembling, outmatched, terrified. Ethan didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. The man went down, releasing Grace, who scrambled away on hands and knees. Ethan stepped over the body without looking at it, positioned himself between the children and the window. "Everyone okay?" "Sam's hurt." Ruby's voice shook. "And Toby won't wake up." Ethan looked at the younger boy lying still and pale on the cot. The fever had gotten worse, much worse, but there was no time to deal with that now. "Stay down. Stay quiet. Don't move from this room." He went back to the fight. It was over faster than he expected, not because they won, but because Blackwood suddenly pulled his men back. Ethan watched them retreat confused until he saw the reason. Riders coming from the south, a lot of them, 20 maybe more, with the glint of sunlight on badges and the organized movement of trained men. Marshal Sterling had arrived. Blackwood saw them too. His face went rigid, calculating, adapting. Then he wheeled his horse around and shouted for his men to fall back. "This isn't over, Walker," he called as he rode. "I have rights, I have papers. The law is on my side." "Then come back with the law," Ethan shouted after him. "But don't bring guns to a fight you started." Blackwood didn't respond, just disappeared into the trees with his surviving men leaving their dead behind in the snow. Deputy Webb appeared at Ethan's side, blood on his sleeve from a graze, but otherwise intact. "You okay?" "I'll live." "The children?" "Scared. One of the boys is hurt, the one with the fever." "Toby." "I know." Webb was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry. About not telling you who I was, who I'm related to. You're here now, fighting against him. That's what matters. Is it? Sam was right to be suspicious. I am one of them, or I was." "You're one of us now," Ethan said firmly. "You proved that when you pulled that trigger." Marshal Owen Sterling was a tall man with gray at his temples and the kind of presence that made people stand straighter when he walked into a room. He listened to the whole story without interrupting. When Ethan finished, Sterling was quiet for a long moment. "My brother spoke highly of you," he finally said. "Said you were the bravest man in the regiment. Said you saved his life at Antietam." "He saved mine first." "That's what he said you'd say." Sterling almost smiled. "Mr. Walker, what you've done here, taking in these children, standing up to a man like Blackwood, that takes a different kind of courage than warfare. The kind that doesn't get medals. Don't want medals, just want those children safe." "They will be. I'm taking personal responsibility for this case. Blackwood's papers might hold up in some corrupt mountain court, but they won't hold up in mine." Sterling's expression hardened. "His empire is going to fall, Mr. Walker. It might take time, but it's going to fall." Dr. Hayes arrived with the marshal's group. He went immediately to work on Toby, whose condition had deteriorated badly. The boy's fever was at 104 degrees. His breathing came in short, desperate gasps. His lips had taken on a bluish tinge. "Pneumonia," Dr. Hayes said grimly after his examination. "Advanced. The stress and exposure made it worse." "Can you help him?" Ethan asked. "I can try, but he needs to be in town in a proper bed with proper medicine, and even then—" The doctor shook his head. "He's very weak. It could go either way." "Do whatever you have to do," Ethan said. "Whatever it costs. Just save him." That night, with guards posted and the children finally asleep, Ethan sat on the porch watching the stars. He was exhausted beyond measure, every muscle aching, his mind spinning with everything that had happened. Maggie found him there. She moved slowly, favoring her wounded shoulder, but there was determination in every step. She sat down beside him without asking permission, pulling a quilt around her shoulders against the cold. "You should be resting," Ethan said. "I've been resting for 3 days. I needed air." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you. For today. For fighting for us." "Wasn't going to let him take you." "Most men would have. $500 is a lot of money. Not enough to buy my soul." Maggie turned to look at him, really look at him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. "You're a good man, Ethan Walker." "I'm just a man doing what's right. That's what makes you good." She paused. "Ruby told me what you said to her, about her mama's death not being her fault. It's the truth. It's what she needed to hear, what I should have told her myself, but didn't know how." Maggie's voice went soft. "She looks at you like you hung the moon. You know that?" "She looks like my daughter. I can't help but see Charlotte when I look at her." "Is that all you see?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "No. I see a brave little girl who saved her mother's life, who kept 5 other children alive through hell, who deserves a chance to just be a child again." "And me?" Maggie asked. "What do you see when you look at me?" It was a dangerous question, the kind that changed things. Ethan knew he should deflect, make a joke, change the subject. But sitting there in the starlight with this woman who'd fought death and won, he found he didn't want to. "I see strength," he said finally. "I see dignity. I see someone who refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier. I see." He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "What? Someone who makes this house feel less empty. Someone who makes me remember what it's like to want something besides the end of the day." Maggie was very still. Then slowly she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. "I feel it too," she said quietly. "Whatever this is, I didn't think I'd ever feel anything like it again after Thomas died. Your husband, he died in a mine accident 2 years ago. Left me with nothing but Ruby and my grandmother's medicine knowledge. I thought that was enough. I thought I could survive on that alone." She squeezed his hand. "But these past 3 days watching you with the children, seeing how you care for them, how you fight for them, I don't want to just survive anymore, Ethan. I want to live." Their eyes met in the starlight. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, something that had been locked tight for 4 years beginning to open. "Maggie," he started, but didn't know how to finish. She leaned closer. "I know it's too soon. I know we've only just met. I know there are 100 reasons we should wait. But I also know that life is short and dangerous, and tomorrow isn't promised to anyone." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm glad you found us in that barn. I'm saying I trust you with my daughter's life, which is the most precious thing I have. I'm saying—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I'm saying I'd like to see where this goes, if you would." Ethan looked at her, really looked. At the strength in her face, the hope in her eyes, the courage it must have taken to say those words. He thought about Sarah, about Benjamin and Charlotte, about the family he'd lost. And he thought about Ruby and Sam and the others, about the future that might still be possible if he was brave enough to reach for it. "I'd like that," he said. "Very much." They sat together in the silence after that, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside, 6 children slept. Outside, guards kept watch. And somewhere to the north, Silas Blackwood was plotting his next move. But for this moment, just this one moment, Ethan Walker allowed himself to feel something besides grief and loss and regret. He allowed himself to hope, and it terrified him more than any battle he'd ever fought. The days that followed the attack fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal, if normal could include armed guards patrolling the perimeter and children who woke screaming from nightmares. Marshal Sterling left 2 deputies at the ranch and took the rest of his men back to Buffalo Springs to prepare for the legal battle ahead. He promised to send word as soon as anything changed, but so far the only news was silence. Blackwood was regrouping, planning. Ethan could feel it like a storm building on the horizon. But life had to continue. The children needed routine, needed to feel like they were more than just refugees waiting for the next disaster. So Ethan gave them chores. Nothing too hard, just enough to make them feel useful. Sam helped with the horses and took to it like he'd been born in a stable. Ruby discovered Sarah's old books and appointed herself teacher, drilling the younger ones on letters and numbers with the intensity of a general preparing troops for battle. Hannah found the art supplies that had belonged to Charlotte. Pencils, charcoal paper. She began to draw. At first, just simple things. The ranch, the mountains, the horses. But gradually, her subjects became more complex. The family around the dinner table, Sam protecting the younger children, Ethan standing on the porch with his rifle keeping watch. And in every picture, without fail, there were 6 small figures clustered around one tall one. One morning, Ethan found a drawing on his pillow. It showed him sitting by the fire with all 6 children gathered around. At the bottom, in Hannah's careful, shaky letters, were 3 words that made his throat close up. My papa. He kept that picture in his pocket for the rest of his life. Grace remained the light of the household. She sang while she worked, made up games for Jessie, told elaborate stories about angels and magic. Her optimism was relentless, almost aggressive in its determination to find joy despite everything they'd been through. "Do you think Mama can see me from heaven?" she asked Ethan one afternoon while they were feeding the chickens. "I do. Do you think she's happy there? I think she's watching over you every single day, and I think she's real proud of how brave you've been." Grace considered this scattering grain for the hens. "I wasn't brave. I was scared all the time." "You can be both. Brave doesn't mean not scared. Brave means doing what you have to do even when you're terrified." She looked up at him with those huge eyes. "Like you, like all of us." Toby's recovery was agonizingly slow. Dr. Hayes had been honest from the start. The damage to his lungs was permanent. The boy would never have the stamina of other children his age. He'd tire easily, struggle with strenuous work, and the cough would likely never fully leave him. But Toby was stubborn. "Mama said I was too stubborn to die." He'd tell anyone who'd listen, and he was proving her right. By the time of the trial, he could sit up for hours without gasping for breath. By spring, he could walk to the barn and back without needing to rest. He'd never rope cattle like Sam, never run races with Grace. But he could tend the chickens, could help Hannah with her drawings, could read to Jessie before bed. "You've adapted remarkably," Dr. Hayes told him during a visit. "Many boys with your condition wouldn't have made it this far." "I got reasons to live," Toby said, simply looking at his family gathered around the table. "Good reasons." And through it all, he never complained. Not once. "You're a fighter," Ethan told him one evening while helping him with a steam treatment. "She's gone now. Like everyone else's mama." "I know, son, I know." Toby's fingers tightened on the blanket. "Are you going to be our papa now? Ruby said you might be." The question hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. He looked at this sick, scared little boy who'd been through hell and somehow still had hope left in him. "Would you want that?" he asked carefully. "I ain't never had a papa. Not really. The men at the camp said papas are supposed to protect you, keep you safe." Toby's voice was barely a whisper. "You did that. You came for us when nobody else would." Ethan had to look away, had to blink hard against the burning in his eyes. "Get some rest, Toby. We'll talk more when you're stronger. Promise you won't leave." "I promise." The boy smiled just a little and closed his eyes. Jessie remained the quietest of them all. The toddler rarely spoke, seemed to exist in his own world, clutching that ragged blanket and watching everything with those enormous solemn eyes. Maggie worried about him constantly, but Maggie noticed small changes. The way Jessie's eyes followed conversations, now tracking back and forth like he was understanding more than before. The way he'd mouth words silently when Grace sang. The way his hand would reach out not just to grab, but to point, to gesture, to communicate. "He's trying," Maggie told Ethan. "In his own time, in his own way. He's trying to find his voice again." "Then we'll wait," Ethan said, "as long as it takes." "He hasn't been right since his mother died," she told Ethan one evening. "Sometimes I wonder if he'll ever speak again." "Give him time. He's only 3. He's been through more than most adults could handle. I know, She trailed off, looking at the small boy curled up in Ruby's lap. I wish I could take away his pain. We can't take it away, but we can give him a safe place to heal. That's all any of us can do. Maggie turned to look at Ethan, and something in her expression made his pulse quicken. You're good at this, being a father. I had practice, before. Sarah was lucky to have you. I was lucky to have her. He paused. But I'm grateful for now, too. For this. For all of you. Their hands found each other in the darkness, fingers intertwining. It was becoming easier, this casual touching, more natural, like their bodies knew something their minds were still trying to accept. On the 10th day, everything changed. Ethan was in the barn repairing tack when Marcus Webb rode up alone. The deputy dismounted quickly, urgency in every movement. Blackwood's made his move, Webb said without preamble. Filed papers with the territorial court claiming unlawful seizure of contracted laborers. He's got 3 judges in his pocket, and one of them agreed to hear the case. Ethan's jaw tightened. When? 5 days from now, in Buffalo Springs. So he's trying to use the law to take them back. Trying, yes. Whether he'll succeed is another matter. Webb pulled a sheaf of papers from his saddlebag. I've been doing some digging. Turns out Blackwood's contracts have problems. Technical violations, signature irregularities. Nothing that would matter to a corrupt judge, but to an honest one. Can we get an honest judge? Working on it. The territorial governor owes Marshal Sterling a favor, and he's none too happy about what's been going on in those mountains. He might be willing to appoint a special magistrate, someone outside Blackwood's influence. Might isn't good enough. Politics is never certain, Mr. Walker, but I've got another card to play. Webb lowered his voice, though they were alone. I have records, from my time working for my uncle, documents he thought I'd destroyed. What kind of documents? Webb's face was grim. The kind that show exactly what happens to children who can't work anymore. Names, dates, locations of graves he thinks nobody knows about. Ethan felt cold rage settle into his bones. You'll testify to this? I will, even though it'll destroy what's left of my family, even though my uncle will likely try to kill me for it. Webb met Ethan's eyes. Those children in your house deserve justice, and I'm done being a coward. You're not a coward. You're here. That's what matters. Tell that to Sam. He looks at me like I'm the enemy. Give him time. He's 9 years old and his trust has been shattered so many times he doesn't know who's safe anymore. But he'll come around. They all will. That evening, Ethan gathered the children and Maggie in the main room. The fire crackled, casting warm shadows on the walls. 6 pairs of eyes watched him with varying degrees of apprehension. I need to talk to you about something important, he began. There's going to be a trial in Buffalo Springs. Marshal Sterling wants to stop Mr. Blackwood for good. But to do that, he needs people to tell the truth about what happened in those mines, people who were there. You mean us? Ruby's voice was flat. I mean whoever's willing. Nobody's going to force you. If you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to. Silence stretched out heavy and fraught. Then Sam spoke. What happens if we don't testify? Then Blackwood might win his case, get the children back, or at least enough legal cover to keep operating. Other kids will end up in those mines. And if we do testify, Ruby asked, then we've got a real chance to shut him down for good. The children looked at each other. That silent communication, again the language of shared suffering. Finally Sam stood. I'll do it. Sam, you don't have to. I know. I want to. His voice was steady. What they did to Hannah, what they tried to do, somebody needs to say it out loud. Somebody needs to make them answer for it. Hannah, who'd been silent throughout, reached over and took Sam's hand. Didn't speak, just held on. I'll testify too. Ruby's chin lifted in that familiar defiant gesture. For Mama. She died trying to protect me. The least I can do is tell people why. One by one they agreed. Even Toby, still weak, propped up on pillows, insisted he would tell his part. Only Jessie stayed silent, but Jessie was only 3. Too young to understand, too young to testify. Ethan looked at them, these 6 broken children who'd somehow found the courage to fight back, and felt something swell in his chest that might have been pride, or might have been love, or might have been both. "I'm proud of you," he said, voice rough with emotion. "All of you. Whatever happens, I want you to know that." "We're scared," Grace admitted in a small voice. "I know, sweetheart. So am I. But we're going to do it anyway." "Yeah, we're going to do it anyway. Together." The journey to Buffalo Springs took most of the morning. They traveled in a group for safety. Ethan, Maggie, the 6 children, Marshal Sterling with 8 deputies, Dr. Hayes to monitor Toby and Marcus Webb. Toby had to lie in a wagon, still too weak to ride, but he was conscious and alert and determined to be there. The weather cooperated, cold but clear, no new snow to slow them down. The children were quiet during the ride, each lost in their own thoughts. Grace tried to sing, but her voice kept breaking. Hannah drew in a small sketchbook Webb had given her. Sam rode next to Ethan, jaw set, preparing himself for what was to come. Ruby sat in the wagon with her mother and Jessie teaching the toddler to count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her voice was steady, a lifeline of normalcy in the midst of chaos. Ethan and Maggie rode side by side for much of the journey. They didn't talk much, but their hands would find each other when the horses drew close enough. Small touches. Reassurances. Promises without words. "After this is over," Ethan said at one point, "what will you do?" Maggie looked at him surprised. "I haven't thought that far." "You could stay. At the ranch. You and Ruby. All of you. As what, your housemaid?" "As—" Ethan struggled for the right words. "As whatever you want to be." Maggie understood what he wasn't saying. Her cheeks colored slightly, but she didn't look away. "Ethan, I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing. But these past weeks, having you there, having all of you, I've felt alive again. And it's because of you." "I feel it too," she said quietly. "But let's survive the trial first. Then we'll talk about after." Buffalo Springs came into view just before noon. The town was bigger than Ethan remembered, more buildings, more people, more noise. The kind of place that was growing fast, drawing settlers and businessmen, and all the complications that came with civilization. The courthouse sat at the center of everything, a 2-story brick building with pillars out front and a flag snapping in the cold wind. People had gathered on the steps in the street, pressed against the windows of nearby shops. Word had spread about what was happening today, and it seemed like half the territory had come to watch. As their group rode down the main street, Ethan heard whispers from the crowd. "Those are the children. So small. How could anyone? Blackwood should hang for what he's done." But there were other voices too, colder ones. "Runaway laborers, nothing more. Man's got legal contracts, can't just ignore the law. Those children are property. Sad, but that's how it is." Ruby's hand tightened on the wagon rail. Ethan caught her eye and shook his head slightly. "Don't listen. They don't matter." But they did matter, he knew. Public opinion could sway judges, influence juries, determine outcomes. If enough people believed Blackwood's lies, justice might not prevail. They were halfway down the street when a woman stepped into their path. Mrs. Victoria Ashford was everything Ethan had heard, and more. Tall, imperious, dressed in expensive black silk, with a hat that probably cost more than most families made in a month. Her face was carefully composed, but her eyes blazed with righteous fury. "Mr. Walker," her voice carried across the sudden silence, "you've made your choice. I hope you're prepared for the consequences. The only consequence I care about is justice being served." "Justice?" Mrs. Ashford's laugh was brittle. "You call harboring criminals justice. These children are contracted laborers who fled their legal obligations. These children are human beings who were being enslaved. That's not what the law says. Then the law is wrong." Mrs. Ashford's face flushed red. She turned her attention to Maggie, still sitting in the wagon with Jessie in her lap. "Miss Bennett, or should I say Mrs. Bennett, Tell me, did you seduce Mr. Walker as part of your scheme?" Maggie stood up slowly, carefully mindful of her wounded shoulder. When she spoke, her voice was calm, steady, and utterly cold. "I seduced no one, ma'am. I nearly died. He saved my life. And if you have a problem with that, it says more about you than it says about me." "How dare you address me in that tone? Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are. You're a woman who'd rather attack someone weaker than admit she's wrong. You're a woman who values propriety more than human life. And you're a woman I have no interest in impressing." The crowd gasped. No one talked to Victoria Ashford that way. The woman's face went from red to purple. You insolent!" "Victoria, that's enough." A new voice, older and warmer, cut through the tension. Martha Yates, owner of the town's cafe, stepped forward from the crowd. She was in her 50s, sturdy and practical, with the no-nonsense air of someone who'd seen too much to be impressed by social posturing. "This woman's been shot, nearly died, and you're attacking her character," Martha continued. "Shame on you." A few other women nodded. The tide was beginning to turn. Mrs. Ashford looked around, realized she was losing support, and drew herself up stiffly. "This isn't over. The court will decide who's right." "Yes," Maggie said quietly. "It will." Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with tension. Rows of wooden benches filled with spectators, all eyes turning as Ethan led the children down the center aisle. At the front, behind a table piled with papers, sat Silas Blackwood. He looked different from the last time Ethan had seen him. Calmer, more confident. Dressed in an expensive suit with a gold watch chain gleaming at his vest. Like a man who knew he was going to win and was just going through the motions for form's sake. 4 lawyers surrounded him, shuffling papers, whispering strategy. Behind them sat a dozen supporters, well-dressed men with hard eyes and calculating expressions. Blackwood's gaze found the children and he smiled. That same cold smile from the ranch. His eyes lingered on Ruby, on Maggie, and his smile widened. "That's him," Ruby whispered, pressing close to her mother. "That's the man who killed Mama, who tried to kill her." "I know, sweetheart, but he can't hurt us here." "He hurt you in front of people before. Didn't stop him then." Maggie had no answer to that. A door opened and the judge entered. William Morrison was in his early 60s with silver hair and a face that gave nothing away. He'd been brought in from Denver specifically for this case, untouched by Blackwood's influence. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. He took his seat, surveyed the crowded room with sharp eyes, and brought down his gavel with a crack that made half the children jump. "This court is now in session. The matter before us is the petition filed by Silas Blackwood for the return of contracted laborers currently in the custody of one Ethan Walker." His voice was flat, procedural, impossible to read. Ethan's hands tightened on the bench in front of him. Blackwood's lead lawyer stood. Jonathan Pierce was everything Ethan expected, smooth, polished, with the kind of confidence that came from never losing. His suit was immaculate, his hair perfectly combed, his smile practiced and cold. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of contract law. My client entered into legal agreements with the parents or guardians of these 6 children. The contracts are properly executed, properly witnessed, properly filed with the territorial office." He held up a stack of documents, fanning them out like a winning hand of cards. "They clearly establish my client's rights to the labor of these minors until the terms of service are complete. The children in question fled my client's lawful custody without authorization. They were then taken in by Mr. Walker, who has refused to return them despite repeated requests. This is quite simply theft. We ask the court to order their immediate return." The words hung in the air like poison. Ethan wanted to stand up, to shout, to call Pierce the liar he was. But Marshal Sterling's hand on his shoulder kept him seated. Judge Morrison turned to the other side of the courtroom. "Marshal Sterling, your response." Sterling stood, and there was something solid and immovable about him, like a mountain that had been there long before the rest of them and would be there long after. "Your Honor, we contend that the contracts in question are fraudulent. obtained through coercion, signed by individuals who had no legal authority to bind these children to anything. His voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. Furthermore, we have evidence that Mr. Blackwood's operation has engaged in systematic abuse exploitation and in multiple cases murder. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Those are serious allegations," Judge Morrison said. "Do you have evidence to support them?" "We do, Your Honor. We have documents obtained from Mr. Blackwood's own records, and we have witnesses, the children themselves." Pierce shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The testimony of traumatized children who have been clearly influenced by Mr. Walker cannot be considered reliable. They've been coached, manipulated, turned against my client." "That's for the court to determine, Counselor," Morrison said sharply. "Marshal, you may call your first witness." Sterling turned to the benches where the children sat. "We call Ruby Ann Bennett." Ruby stood slowly. She was so small, so young, dressed in a simple dress Martha Yates had provided. Her feet were still bandaged, her face was pale, but her spine was straight and her eyes were clear. She walked to the witness stand and climbed up into the chair. From there she looked out at the sea of faces at Blackwood, sitting with that cold smile at her mother, watching with barely contained fear at Ethan, who nodded once encouraging. Sterling approached gently. "Can you state your full name and age for the court?" "Ruby Ann Bennett." Her voice was small but steady. "I'm 7 years old." "Ruby, can you tell us how you came to be at Mr. Blackwood's mining camp?" She took a deep breath, gathering herself. "My mama and me, we went there for work. She was a cook. After my papa died in the mines, we didn't have nowhere else to go." "What happened when you arrived?" "At first it seemed okay. Mama worked in the kitchen and I helped her. But then Mr. Blackwood started—" She paused, her voice catching. "He started looking at me different, talking about me to his men, saying things." "What kind of things?" "That I was pretty, that I'd bring a good price, that pretty girls are worth more." The words came out flat, rehearsed like she'd said them to herself so many times they'd lost their power to hurt. Pierce stood. "Objection. This is hearsay and speculation. The child is attributing statements without context or corroboration." "Overruled," Morrison said. "Continue, young lady." Ruby's hands gripped the arms of the chair. "Mama heard what he was saying. She knew what he meant. She tried to leave, tried to take me away. But Mr. Blackwood said we owed him money, for food and shelter. He said the only way to pay it was for Mama to sign a paper. Give me to him." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Every person there, supporter and skeptic alike, leaned forward to hear. "And did your mother sign?" Sterling asked gently. "No, sir." Ruby's voice cracked. "She said she'd die first." "What happened then?" The tears started now, but Ruby didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, let everyone see. "He beat her, made me watch, said it was a lesson about what happens when people say no to him. He hit her, and she just kept saying no. Then she grabbed a knife from the kitchen, tried to fight him, and he—" The word stuck in her throat. "Take your time," Sterling said. He pulled out a gun. Ruby's eyes found Blackwood across the courtroom. "And he shot her, right there in front of me, in front of everyone. And then he smiled." The courtroom erupted. Shouts, gasps, someone crying. Judge Morrison's gavel came down hard, again and again, until order was restored. Pierce was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, I must object strenuously. This is clearly a coached testimony designed to elicit sympathy. There's no evidence to support these wild allegations." "We have the bullet wound," Sterling said coldly. "We have Miss Bennett's testimony. We have multiple witnesses. What more evidence do you need?" "I need proof that my client fired the weapon." "Miss Bennett, you say you saw my client shoot your mother. Did you actually see him pull the trigger?" Ruby's jaw set. "I saw him holding the gun. I saw the smoke. I saw Mama fall." "But did you see the actual shot being fired?" "I saw enough." "Did you or did you not see the moment the weapon discharged?" "I saw him with the gun. I saw Mama bleeding. What else do I need to see? Pierce's smile was cold. You saw what you thought you saw, a traumatized child in a chaotic situation. Is it possible you're mistaken about who fired the weapon? No. Ruby's voice was ice. I'm not mistaken, because he smiled. After Mama fell, he looked right at me and he smiled, like it was funny, like killing her didn't matter. Another ripple through the courtroom. Someone in the back started weeping. And what happened after that? Sterling asked. Mama told me to run. Last words she ever said. Run and don't look back. So I did. I ran into the forest, found the other kids along the way. We kept each other alive. Thank you, Ruby. No further questions. Pierce tried a few more times to shake her story to find inconsistencies, but Ruby held firm. She was 7 years old, and she'd just testified against the man who'd nearly killed her mother with a clarity and courage that most adults couldn't muster. When she finally stepped down, Maggie was there to catch her. Ruby collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing, and Maggie held her tight, whispering words of comfort and pride. Sam was next. He walked to the stand with his shoulders back, looking more like a soldier than a 9-year-old boy. Sterling took him through the basics, how he'd come to the camp, what the work was like, the conditions underground. Can you describe those conditions for the court? Sterling asked. Dark, hot, hard to breathe because of the dust. We worked 12 hours a day, sometimes more. If we slowed down, they beat us. If we got sick, they left us in the tunnels until we either got better or... He stopped. Or what Sam... Or we didn't. Did you ever see children die in those mines? Yes, sir. 3 that I know of. Cave-ins mostly. Or the cough that comes from the dust. Once you got that cough, you didn't last long. Pierce objected repeatedly, claiming bias, unreliability, trauma-induced confusion. Morrison overruled, each time his expression growing darker by the minute. Then came the question Ethan had been dreading. Sam, Sterling said gently, can you tell the court about a man named Burke? Sam's hands gripped the arms of the chair, knuckles white. The courtroom went silent again, sensing something important was coming. Burke was one of Mr. Blackwood's men. He watched Hannah, watched her in a way that wasn't right. What do you mean by that? The way a wolf watches a lamb. Sam's voice shook, but he pushed on, like he was waiting for his chance. He'd touch her hair when he walked by, say things to her. She was scared all the time, jumping at shadows, barely eating. What happened? One night I heard Hannah scream. I ran and found Burke dragging her toward the back buildings, the ones where they took... He couldn't finish. Take your time. Sam swallowed hard. I knew what he was going to do. Everyone knew what happened in those buildings. So I grabbed a rock, big as my fist, and I hit him. Kept hitting him until he stopped moving. The courtroom exploded. Shouts, accusations, someone screaming that Sam should be arrested. Morrison's gavel came down like thunder. Order, I will have order, or I will clear this court. When silence finally returned, Pierce was standing face red with righteous indignation. Your Honor, this boy just confessed to murder. He should be taken into custody immediately. He confessed to saving a child from rape, Sterling shot back. There's a difference. Morrison held up a hand for silence. He looked at Sam for a long moment, and something in his expression softened. Son, how old were you when this happened? 9, sir, same as now. And this man Burke, he was dragging the little girl toward buildings where children were harmed. Yes, sir. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Thank you for your honesty, son. You may step down. As Sam returned to his seat, shaking Hannah did something no one expected. She stood up and walked to the witness stand on her own. I want to testify, she said. Sterling looked surprised but pleased. The court calls Hannah Mitchell. Hannah was sworn in and took her seat. She was tiny in that chair, blonde hair falling around her face, blue eyes huge. For a moment she just sat there silent, and people began to whisper that she wouldn't speak. Then she did. Burke touched me. Her voice was barely audible, but in the silence everyone heard. He said bad things, things that made me feel dirty. I was scared all the time. When he came for me that night, I thought I was going to die. "What happened?" Sterling asked gently. "Sam saved me. Sam is a hero." She looked directly at Sam, and for the first time in months she smiled. "He protected me when nobody else would. He's the bravest person I know." Sam, sitting with the others, started to cry, silent tears streaming down his face. Ruby reached over and took his hand. Toby and Grace gave brief testimonies. Toby about the dust and the cough and the boys who'd disappeared. Grace about her mother's death and the nice lady who'd sold her for $50. Then it was Maggie's turn. She walked to the stand with her head high, her wounded shoulder carried carefully. When she sat down, every eye in the courtroom was on her. Sterling began with simple questions: name, age, relationship to Ruby, how she'd come to work at Blackwood's camp. Then he moved to the crucial part. "Miss Bennett, can you tell the court what happened the night you were shot?" Maggie's voice was steady, clear, unflinching. "I refused to sign my daughter over to Silas Blackwood. He beat me in front of her. I fought back with a kitchen knife. He pulled a gun and shot me." "Why did he want Ruby?" "He said pretty girls bring higher prices. I knew what he meant. I knew what would happen to her if I gave in." Maggie looked directly at Blackwood. "I'd rather die than let him touch my child." Pierce's cross-examination was brutal. He insinuated Maggie had been a prostitute, that she'd attacked Blackwood first, that the shooting was self-defense, but Maggie refused to be shaken. "I cooked food, sir, that's all. I maintained my dignity even when men like your client tried to take it from me." "But you grabbed a weapon first. Isn't that assault?" "Defending my child from a predator isn't assault. It's what any mother would do." Spontaneous applause broke out from some sections of the crowd. Morrison had to gavel for order again. The final witness was Marcus Webb. When Webb was called, a visible ripple went through Blackwood's side of the courtroom. The man himself went rigid, his confident smile finally cracking. Webb walked to the stand with his head high, carrying a leather satchel. When he was sworn in and seated, Sterling asked the crucial question. "Deputy Webb, can you state your relationship to the defendant?" "Silas Blackwood is my uncle, my mother's brother." The courtroom erupted again. Morrison didn't bother trying to quiet it this time, just let the noise wash over them until it died naturally. "And your occupation?" "I was a deputy in Buffalo Springs. Before that I worked at my uncle's mining camp for 3 years." "What did that work entail?" Webb opened the satchel and pulled out a stack of documents. "I helped run the operation, kept records, filed reports, and I kept copies of everything. Copies my uncle thought I'd destroyed." "What do these documents show?" "They show 23 children who died while under my uncle's supervision. They show forged contracts and bribed officials. They show payments to judges and sheriffs to look the other way. And they show—" his voice caught. "They show a map to a mass grave in the high meadow where he buried the ones who didn't survive." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Pierce seemed at a loss for words. Sterling took the documents, began reading selected passages aloud. Names of children, causes of death listed as accident or illness when the truth was clearly otherwise, payments to officials. Everything laid bare in Blackwood's own handwriting. When Pierce finally composed himself enough to cross-examine, his voice had lost its smooth confidence. "Mr. Webb, you expect this court to believe you'd testify against your own family. I expect this court to believe the truth, that I finally chose to be a decent human being, something my uncle never taught me but I learned anyway. You're betraying your blood. I'm honoring my conscience." Pierce tried several more attacks, but Webb held firm. By the time he stepped down, even Blackwood's supporters looked shaken. Before Morrison could call the recess, the courtroom doors burst open. A man in travel-worn clothes strode down the aisle, breathing hard. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption. My name is Thomas Chen, Territorial Surveyor. I was hired by Mr. Blackwood 5 years ago to map his mining claims." Pierce jumped to his feet. "Objection. This is highly irregular." "I'll allow it," Morrison said. "Mr. Chen, what brings you here?" Chen pulled out a set of maps. I recently discovered that Mr. Blackwood's mining operation extends onto federal land. Land designated as Crow Nation territory under the Treaty of 1868. Everything he's been doing, the mining, the labor camps, all of it has been illegal from the start. The courtroom exploded. Even Blackwood's lawyers looked shocked. That means, Sterling began, that means, Chen finished, every contract, every claim, every piece of paper he has is worthless. He never had legal authority over any of it. Blackwood's face went white, then purple with rage. You were paid to keep that quiet. I was, Chen agreed, but I couldn't live with myself anymore, not after hearing what those children went through. Morrison's gavel came down. This changes everything. He called a brief recess to review the new evidence. Judge Morrison called a recess. 30 minutes to consider the evidence, the longest 30 minutes of Ethan's life. The children clustered together, holding hands, supporting each other. Maggie stood with them, one arm around Ruby, the other holding Jessie. Ethan positioned himself between them and the rest of the courtroom, a human shield against whatever might come. When Morrison returned, his face gave nothing away. He sat, arranged his papers, and looked out at the packed courtroom. I have reviewed all evidence presented and heard compelling testimony from multiple witnesses. The contracts presented by Mr. Blackwood's counsel are deeply flawed. Signatures appear forged. Terms are unconscionable. Several signatories lacked legal authority to bind these children to anything. A stirring in the crowd. Hope beginning to bloom. Furthermore, the testimony of the children and Miss Bennett is consistent, detailed, and credible. The corroborating evidence provided by Deputy Webb is damning. Therefore, the petition for return of contracted laborers is denied. Cheers erupted, people standing applauding. But Morrison wasn't finished. His gavel came down hard. Silence, I'm not done. The room quieted, though the energy remained electric. Furthermore, Silas Blackwood, you are under arrest on the following charges: attempted murder of Margaret Bennett, kidnapping and trafficking of minors, conspiracy to commit murder in the attack on Mr. Walker's ranch, fraud, bribery of public officials, and accessory to the deaths of 23 children. Deputies moved forward. Blackwood stood, his face a mask of rage barely contained. This is outrageous. I have rights. I have lawyers. This court has no authority. This court has all the authority it needs, Morrison said coldly. Your rights end where children's lives begin. Take him away. As the deputies moved to restrain him, Blackwood's eyes found Ethan across the courtroom. This isn't over, Walker. I have powerful friends. They'll have me out within a year, and when I'm free I'll find you. I'll find those children, and I'll make you all pay. You can try, Ethan said quietly. But you'll have to go through me first. Blackwood was led away in chains, still shouting threats and promises. His lawyers gathered their papers and left quickly, already abandoning a sinking ship. His supporters melted into the crowd, suddenly unwilling to be associated with him. And 6 children who'd been slaves and victims and survivors were finally truly free. The celebration happened spontaneously. Martha Yates opened her cafe to everyone, bringing out pies and cakes and coffee. Strangers congratulated the children, shook Ethan's hand, embraced Maggie. Even Mrs. Ashford approached, her face red with shame. I was wrong, she said stiffly. About you, Miss Bennett, about the children. I let fear cloud my judgment. My husband. He owed Blackwood money, a great deal of money. Blackwood said if I helped discredit you publicly, he'd forgive half the debt. I was desperate. I'm sorry. Maggie studied her for a moment, then nodded. Apology accepted. We all make mistakes. Mrs. Ashford hesitated, then reached into her handbag. I'd like to contribute to the children's care. It's the least I can do. She held out an envelope. Maggie shook her head gently. We don't need your money, Mrs. Ashford, but if you truly want to help, there are 20 other children being freed from Blackwood's camp. They'll need homes, sponsors, people willing to give them a second chance. Something shifted in Mrs. Ashford's expression. Not quite warmth, but understanding. I'll speak to the Ladies' Aid Society. We'll do what we can. That would be appreciated, Ethan said. As Mrs. Ashford walked away, Maggie turned to Ethan. Do you think she'll actually help? I think people can surprise you. She's not evil, just scared. And sometimes scared people do terrible things until someone shows them there's another way. That evening, after the children were finally asleep in the hotel rooms Sterling had arranged, Ethan and Maggie walked together under the stars. The town was quiet now, the excitement of the day fading into peaceful darkness. They stopped at the edge of town, looking out at the mountains rising black against the star-filled sky. Maggie shivered, and Ethan drew her close, his arm around her shoulders. "It's really over," she said quietly. "The legal part is, Blackwood will spend the rest of his life in prison if he lives that long. Other prisoners don't take kindly to men who hurt children. And the other children, the ones still at the camp. Sterling's organizing a raid. They'll all be freed within the week, families found or new homes arranged. None of them will go back to that hell." Maggie leaned against him, and Ethan tightened his hold. They stood like that for a long moment, just breathing, just being. "I have something to ask you," Ethan said finally. "Something I've been thinking about for weeks." Maggie turned to look at him, moonlight catching in her dark eyes. "What is it?" "4 years ago I buried my family. I thought my life was over. I wanted to die but didn't have the courage." He took her hand, held it between both of his. "Then I heard a scream in the snow, found 6 children and a woman fighting to protect them. And you, Maggie, you brought light back into my world." "Ethan, let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few weeks. But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and tomorrow isn't promised. I love you, Maggie Bennett. I love your strength, your courage, your dignity. I love the way you care for those children. I love everything about you, and I want you to stay. Not as my housemaid or my guest, as my wife, if you'll have me." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "I thought I'd never love again after Thomas died. Thought I'd spend my life alone just surviving." She reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "But you showed me what a good man looks like, not with words but with actions. You risked everything for us. You fought for us. And yes, Ethan Walker, I'll marry you. I'll be your wife, and we'll raise these children together, and we'll build something good out of all this pain." Ethan kissed her then. Not the chaste, careful kiss they'd shared before, but something deeper. A promise and a beginning and a celebration all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "When?" Maggie asked. "Soon. As soon as we can arrange it. I don't want to wait." "Neither do I." They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, the future spreading out before them full of possibility. 6 months later, spring came to the Montana Valley like a benediction. Marcus Webb had become a regular visitor to the ranch. The young deputy, now promoted to marshal after Sterling's retirement, made the journey from Buffalo Springs once a month. Not for official business, but to check on "his kids," as he'd started calling them. Sam had forgiven him. It had taken time. But one evening Sam had approached Webb and said simply, "You chose right in the end. That's what matters." Webb had never married, never had children of his own. But he became Uncle Marcus to the Walker children, bringing gifts, telling stories, teaching Sam and Ruby to read law books when they showed interest in justice. "You saved them," Ethan had told him once. "No." Webb had replied, watching the children play. "We saved each other." The ranch had changed. New buildings, fresh paint, expanded pastures. But the biggest change was the life that filled every corner. Children's voices raised in laughter or argument, the smell of Maggie's cooking wafting from the kitchen, the sound of Sam teaching Toby how to rope a post, Grace singing while Hannah drew pictures in the sunshine, and Jesse, miracle of miracles, had started talking. Not much, not yet, but enough. His first real sentence, spoken clearly one morning at breakfast, had been, "Love you, Papa. Love you, Mama Maggie." Ethan and Maggie had married on a warm day in April, with all 6 children standing up with them. Ruby had been maid of honor, solemn and proud in a new dress. Sam had stood as Ethan's best man, tall and serious, finally allowing himself to be the child he should have been all along. Now it was May, and Maggie was pregnant. 6 months along her belly swelling with new life. The children were simultaneously excited and anxious about the new baby. Would there still be room for them? Would Ethan and Maggie still love them? The same? Ethan gathered them one evening to address these fears directly. "I want to tell you something," he said with all 6 arranged around him in the main room, "about family and love and how none of that works the way you might think." 6 pairs of eyes watched him solemnly. "When Sarah and Benjamin and Charlotte died, I thought my heart died with them. I thought I'd never love anyone again, that there wasn't room." He looked at each child in turn. "But then you came, and I learned something. The heart doesn't replace love with love. It doesn't have a limit. It just gets bigger, big enough to hold everyone." "So you love us the same as the new baby?" Grace asked. "I love all of you. Different maybe because you're all different people, but equally, completely. You're my children, all of you. The new baby won't change that." "Promise?" Ruby asked. "I promise, and this time I can keep it." That afternoon, Ethan found himself standing on the hill behind the ranch, looking down at the 3 graves, Sarah, Benjamin, Charlotte. It had been 6 months since he'd visited. The guilt of that absence gnawed at him. Maggie appeared at his side, her hand finding his. She didn't speak, just stood with him in the silence. "I hope they understand," Ethan said finally, "that loving you and the children doesn't mean I've forgotten them. They understand. If they loved you, and I know they did, then they want you to be happy. I am happy. For the first time in years, I'm genuinely happy, and that terrifies me. Why? Because I'm afraid it'll be taken away again, that this is all too good to be real." Maggie squeezed his hand. "Life doesn't come with guarantees, Ethan. We could lose everything tomorrow, but we could also have 50 wonderful years. We don't know. All we can do is love each other fiercely while we have the chance." They stood there together as the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below they could hear the children playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Mama, Papa, come on. Jessie wants to show you something." Ethan and Maggie looked at each other and smiled. Then hand in hand they walked down the hill toward their family, toward their children, toward their second chance. Some stories end with tragedy, some end with triumph. This one ended with something better, something truer, something that would echo through generations. It ended with love and laughter and the daily miracle of broken people healing together. It ended with family, and that was enough. That was everything.